Okay, welcome to another edition of Culture Class Podcast where we get to interact with people from different backgrounds. And today we have a returning guest, Elvis Leone. Elvis, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Leon, please, Leon.
Leon. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. At least I didn't say Leon like they did that, like they'll call you in the army, right?
Yeah, Leon. Yeah, Leon is all right because everybody calls me that, and it's Memorial Day weekend, so we're here, remembering the fallen and those who served, and so
Huge respect to everyone who put their life on the line to our literally recording this on May 29th, Memorial Day. Exactly. So, and Elvis is a veteran as well. So thank you so much for your service.
yeah, yeah, no problem, man. Big weekend, and I've had some friends that passed recently due to taking their own life, unfortunately,
Oh,
losing a battle
wow.
with PTSD. So this is something that a lot of us struggle with, and it's not really spoken about. But 22 veterans commit suicide every day in this country, and
Wow.
that is
22?
22 a day. So that is a huge problem that I hope is addressed and by your, or at least I wanted to bring awareness to that because I lost a really good friend, and I've been mourning for the last few months of this sudden and untimely death.
I'm sorry to hear that, bro. And things aren't getting better because I know that the VA, I used to live in Washington, D.C. years ago, and I know the VA used to take a lot of steps. So are cases at least coming down? Are they taking this seriously at Veterans Affairs and even like DOD and things like that? Or
I try to remove myself from that world, so I don't have any
mm,
like updated statistics or how they're helping exactly. But
hmm.
even living here in Los Angeles, the homeless crisis here is worse than probably anywhere in the rest of the country. And
Hmm.
you do see a lot of homeless veterans here. The VA always is doing their best, and they have made improvements even since I have started using those services. Because when we first came home, there were just backlog. There was crazy wait lists to get any kind of help whatsoever.
Hmm.
And the LAVA is not the best in my personal opinion. Denver is way better for sure. For example, I tried to actually get some mental health, try to find a therapist here, and it's like a 3 or 4 month wait period. So it's like
Wow.
if you're in a dire situation and a crisis, you have to wait that amount of time, or maybe check yourself into the ER. So there's other ways to maybe get immediate help, but that's usually just the emergency room at the VA, and they'll sort you out for the day or for the week, or I don't know. But it's tough times, man, in our country for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. Like, there's so many systems in America are just so broken. Government bureaucracy and all this is just making it harder and harder. Um, but yeah, Elvis and I met like what was it like 3 years ago now, 2 years ago during the pandemic, right? We met up, and I think this year second time appearing on the podcast. The first time where I think we had an episode for Hispanic Heritage Month like 2 3 years ago, and it's always interesting seeing guests come back to the podcast. And how we actually met was because of the story you were trying to tell, and you've been trying to tell for going on a decade now, and we'll kind of like dive into that. But how have you been this past 2 or 3 years? We're just talking about before the episode how you did a lot of traveling and how you relocated from Denver to LA. But how have you been this past 2 3 years since we last spoke?
Yeah, like you said, more traveling than I ever imagined that would ever do in my life.
Hmm.
Google Maps gives me a yearly report, and
Hmm.
in the last 3 years since the pandemic, I have traveled 120,000 miles, Nusa, if you can believe,
Wow.
circumventing the globe 3 times. I
Wow.
never in my life expected to do this, nor that I want to, but that was like the path that kind of fell before me, and I was also going through a tough period. Like I said, a difficult breakup. I lost a lot of friends along the way. I just been in this weird transitional period, and I adopted this nomad lifestyle that they call it, nomad traveling. I traveled a lot of those miles in solitude, and a lot of that traveling wasn't even fun. I think I was just doing it because I didn't know what else to do, and I wanted
Mm,
to remove myself from friends and family and more in by myself. I didn't want to be kind of seen because the stigma that there's behind mental health and stuff. You feel like shame and guilt for feeling these ways, and I kind of wanted to hide from the world. So it's been an interesting period, man. But again, I'm very fortunate because not too many people can say that they have traveled this amount. My passport is completely stamped up, which is
mm,
amazing. And all I could show is just gratitude for the ability to even have the passport that gives me the opportunity
the
to do
access.
these kind of
Hmm.
things. So I'm very blessed, but it was also a very difficult period in my life. And the last decade, dealing with this true crime story that happened to my family,
Hmm.
really changed my, you know, my mentality on a lot of things. We were just saying off camera about how broken a lot of these systems are, whether that's the VA or the justice system. Like me and my family trying to get justice in Denver, Colorado, as well as in Guatemala. So trying to get justice in two countries for this, you know, crime that happened towards my father, a kidnapping, to be exact. So.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And let's just dive into that. So, when we first met 2, 3 years ago, we're trying to tell this story in a documentary, in an audio documentary format, in a scripted podcast series. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of logistical stuff. We made some headway into that, but unfortunately, we just couldn't pull it together. But I'm happy to have you back on the podcast 3 years later, seeing that you made some progress. I've seen you in the media 1 or 2 times, and happy to dive into the story so our listeners get a taste of that project that we couldn't complete, right? And this is about, your father, Orlando's kidnapping in Guatemala almost 10 years ago in October 2014. Before we dive into that very, very sensitive, I'm sure your family has been a lot this past decade. Let's talk about your dad, Orlando. I know since you've been making this documentary now about the case, you and your dad's relationship has grown stronger. But what do you remember about your dad, kind of like growing up as a kid?
My dad was a very kind being, but also was a very strict person. So I feel like I saw the extremes of my father. I either saw him as a happy, always playing the guitar, singing at parties, and then also seeing his rage, towards uh, others or us, just because I don't know, different times as well too, different generation of how they would handle, I guess, discipline to their kids. So, but no, yeah, I think that, no, my relationship with my dad's always been pretty solid for the most part, but, yeah, it's okay now. And it did grow stronger over the years because we, traveled most of North America together, and not too many people can say that they've done this with their father. But during this kidnapping and trying to seek justice, I've been following my dad with a camera for about 7 years now, and we've driven across 8 U.S. states, and we've driven from Denver, Colorado, all the way to Guatemala through Texas. And that's like a long road trip. And, these road trips, all you have time for is to talk, So
Mm-hmm.
it was getting to know your father in a different level, because all you have is time to chat on these long expeditions.
Yeah, definitely. And when you mentioned, your dad being strict and immigrant parents, like you said, different generation, definitely not sparing the rod, that type
Mhm.
of thing. I can totally understand that. But your dad, like obviously he's someone as he grew up in Guatemala, from what I understand, and he got into the transport business at some point, transporting cars from the US to Latin America or South America and trying to sell those cars in order to make a living for himself and his family. I think the term is transmigrante. Do you know how your dad got into that line of business?
Yeah, it was a friend that basically was saying that there was this business where you can make 100 to 200% profits, and that sounds ridiculous. But when you purchase a vehicle, specifically Toyota trucks, that's like the main vehicle that Guatemalans are seeking, just because it's a dependable work vehicle and there's an excess amount of parts there, so you can always fix these vehicles. But these cars, pickup trucks, are usually sold for like maybe $1,500 to $2,000 here in the U.S. These vehicles are anywhere from 10 to up to 30 years old, but
Mm-hmm.
you can sell them for double or triple the price in Guatemala. And my someone told my father about this, and he's been doing it for almost 20 years. And on top of the actual truck, people or individuals like my father, like you said, transmigrantes is the proper nomenclature for this subculture of Central Americans that import these goods.
Mm-hmm.
They also pack these vehicles with other goods, such as washers and dryers, refrigerators, or whatever is requested of them from the client in Guatemala.
Got it. Got it. And this must not have been an easy job because I used to be in the trucking industry, right? Kind of like still am. Used to have a trucking business, but that was US based, right? And even moving stuff within the US had its own challenges as far as like security and, just people perils on the road and things like that, moving stuff cross border, particularly to Southern America. I imagine your dad must have encountered a lot of stuff, right? Like in the early days, what were some of those stories that he told you guys about the challenges faced on the road transporting these cars to South America?
Well, driving through Mexico can get dangerous in some areas, especially in some of the regions where cartels are above the law or actually are the law, because some of these states in Mexico, there's police checkpoints that are cartel police, not actually governed police, by the
Mm-hmm.
by the country. So yeah, going through these areas, it's kind of like, I don't know, you can call it like a bandit country, right? Because there's a lot of pirates, there's a lot of theft, there's having to pay bribes for your release, or police will pull you over and say, "Hey, we can do this the easy way or the hard way."
Mm-hmm.
So we could either unload everything in your truck and review everything and waste 3 4 hours of your day, or you can just give us $100 right now and you can move on. So that's a part of the expenditures that you have to take into account when you go on these trips. My father would always have a separate wad of $100 bills that would be
Mm-hmm.
used strictly for bribing. So greasing the pockets, as they say.
Right. Got it. Got it.
uh,
And so what happened like leading up to the incident in October 2014 when your dad got kidnapped? Like, was there any sign? Was it just a regular trip that, hey, was transporting a car for a client, or was it unusual, that particular load unusual? What happened leading up to that particular trip?
well, my dad was hired by this client that he had worked with in the past, and this was a routine delivery. It was of a box truck specifically, and the box truck was completely full of furniture and electronics and all kinds of random things. And that vehicle was in a pretty bad car accident in Mexico, and the police impounded that truck. And my father was immediately told that this had happened because my dad wasn't driving this truck. He had facilitated someone to drive the vehicle because he was unable to. So he put the client in touch with a different driver. So when that driver got in an accident, the client blamed my father for making that poor connection in their eyes, right? That
Mm-hmm.
so that's
Was the
when things
driver
started.
okay? The driver who was driving the truck?
Yeah. He went to the doctor. He got
Mm-hmm.
banged up, but he was released a couple of days later. But the that's when things got weird. These guys started acting very aggressive towards my father about getting this vehicle out of this impound lot immediately. It took my father a couple weeks to get it out of there,
Mm-hmm.
and he did it though. He did it. He rescued the vehicle, managed to get it to Guatemala. It was wreckage, but he kind of hauled this totaled box truck to Guatemala and gave it to the client
The
there.
client. What was
And
the value of, I mean, for a box truck for people who are listening, outside the US, it's kind of like a 26-foot truck, kind of not like the long semi trucks, but kind of like half of that. But since the vehicle was already banged up, like what was the value of the vehicle or the contents in the vehicle that made the client so eager to get this delivered? I mean, if the car was going there to be sold and it wasn't a crash, like there was no more value, right? So why were they pressing your dad to still get out the junkyard to deliver that?
well, that's a big mystery to this day. And there's been a lot of theories of what was in that vehicle, and we can get to that in a second. But it's been theorized by the police and by people close to the situation that there was either a lot of cash in that car that was hidden in the electronics or the furniture, or weapons or both.
Mm,
So we've heard all of that and in between. So, but fast forward to or backtracking a bit, my father delivered the vehicle to these individuals. They shook hands. They said goodbye. We'll see you back in Denver. And my dad went home, went to sleep. The very next morning, those same individuals came to knocking on my dad's door in his house in Guatemala, and they invited him to go get something to drink, some breakfast. My dad thought that was a very odd that they came unannounced,
hmm
and within the next minute, someone pulled a gun on my father and pistol whipped him in his face, broke his teeth, and threw him in the back of a truck. And my dad woke up, several hours later, tied, sandwiched in between two guys, and there was two men driving in the front, and they took him into an undisclosed location to an unmarked grave, and that's when the ransom negotiations began between us and these kidnappers while we were sitting in Denver, Colorado.
And this is such a wild story, right? Because typically, like kidnappers don't allow their identity to be revealed, right? They can plot and plan, but in this case, like again, too many things connecting. There was this client your dad was delivering for. He had shook their hand the day before. They had invited him out, and suddenly he's somewhere in a grave in a graveyard being kidnapped. Like, was it that they just didn't care, or this was more of like some type of intimidation tactic? Because clearly they should have known that your father kind of like can put one or two together and know where this is coming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe did your dad not even initially consider it a kidnapping? Maybe you just consider, well, I guess it was an abduction either way, or maybe you just consider it something else and not that.
Yeah, I think my dad was incredibly confused because, well, again, these are men that he knew. These are men that he's worked with in the past. These are men that live in our community in Denver, Colorado. So that was the strange part was like, why would they even attempt to do anything like this? Because you're right, they didn't do it with ski mask on or anything, bare face, friend and acquaintances. So
Hmm.
that also kind of is a lesson of you can't really trust everyone you come in contact with because
Facts.
you don't know who they are behind closed doors. So
Facts. Facts. So what happened like when your dad was transported to this grave site? How did they reach out to your family? How did that start to unfold?
So when I personally got the call, it was on a Saturday morning, and my mom called me crying, saying that someone had kidnapped my dad. And obviously, that's a phone call you never imagine to ever receiving. So
Hmm.
I didn't even know where to begin. But the first thought in my head was like, I'm gonna race home and get my gun. And that was because my brother had called me soon after and says, I know these guys. I've met them, and they live in Lafayette, Colorado. That's about 30 miles from our house in Aurora, Colorado. So when my brother said he knew where they lived, I'm like, well, let's go talk to them. And I went and got my gun, and I think about that day all the time because I feel like if we didn't find them, we drove up and down the street. My brother couldn't quite, pinpoint where that house was, but I was always thinking about what if we had found that house? What
Mm.
would have happened then? Emotions were high, anger was high. So, and while we were driving, looking for this house, I was on the call. I was on the phone, trying to get a hold of the FBI, and calling the police, trying to get any kind of help or assistance. And we had just left the Aurora Police Department that completely dismissed us. They're like, "This isn't real." They're like, "This is a hoax. Your father's playing tricks on you. Your father must be in debt and
This
lying
is
to
what the
you guys."
police were telling you.
Yeah, the police said your father must be in debt. He's lying to you so he can get money from you guys. Like, and I'm like, well, anyways, we can get to that. I'm still upset about that. But so we left the Aurora Police Department in search of these men, and I'm on the phone with the FBI, and they say we can't do anything. They're like, you need to file a complaint on the Internet Crimes website on their page.
The
Written,
internet crime?
yeah, it's called IC3,
Okay.
IC3.gov or something like that. So,
Okay.
and any I guess they call it internet crime or scam. You can report there. So they directed us there, and they just said, "Good luck. We're on our own."
And this
And
is the FBI telling
this
you
is the
this.
FBI, the FBI,
Interesting.
and immediately I was just like swarmed with anger because I was like, this can't be real. Like these institutions are here supposedly to help us in times of crisis. And this is one of the biggest crises that our family has seen, maybe even the city of Aurora. I don't know,
Hmm.
like this is a serious crime, international crime, and no one cared. And that was actually the beginning of my mental health decline because it was almost like the veil was lifted of
Mm.
society for me again because I mean I had seen this already when I swore an oath to defend the country, and then you come home after going to war, losing friends, seeing friends lose limbs and their minds, and then you come home and then there's zero help, zero services. And that was the first time that I felt betrayed, you
Right.
know, and I got that under control. It took a couple years to get my PTSD under control, and then this happened, and I was like, wow, they really don't care about us.
This is quite amazing, right? Because if a tourist, an American tourist, a 19-year-old tourist backpacking through a country who's white, for instance, something happens to them, you hear the stories of American embassy and the US, using all their minds to resolve that issue. But here you are, a veteran, and you're facing this challenge just south of the American border in South America, and you're being told kind of like good luck. So I can definitely see how you kind of like felt betrayed by your country, having been deployed and served in the US Army to defend the country yourself. Do you think race or any type of bias was at play there, or how they just saw that, oh, okay, this is maybe a Hispanic family, this thing happened in Guatemala, we don't really care. Do you think that was at play?
That thought, there's no other way or no other reason why I wouldn't believe that, right? Because again, like I've heard the stories that you just mentioned, and I always imagine, like, what if I was a white person? What if I was a son of a senator or some kind of representative? If things would have changed. And but yeah, I think about that all the time, man. But as we progress months and years later, when the FBI finally believed us, those initial meetings, they were like, your dad has to be a narco. Your dad has to be a drug dealer.
Wow, they told you this to your face?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Drug Enforcement Agency said, we will not help you unless your father admits that he was guilty of something, because they're like, that's the only reason people get kidnapped, is if they're involved in something nefarious.
Mm.
And so that, another slap to the face, like that was so disrespectful, for them to
Hmm.
even go that route initially. But yeah, man, that's, I guess so, man. I think racism was at play, or I don't know. Again, the system is broken, for
Right.
sure.
Definitely understand, but how long, like, your dad was still in their custody, right? So
Mhm.
as you were trying to convince the FBI and get law enforcement kind of like up their ass to do something, like, how many days or weeks did that take? Because your dad is still in captivity, right? So how long
Yeah.
did that take for them to start, for the motions to start?
Well, to be honest, well, back to the night of the kidnapping, it's that was a Saturday, and they were asking us for $20,000 for my father's release. And it was Saturday night into Sunday, and it was a holiday weekend in Guatemala specifically too. So the banks were closed. And wait, what holiday was that? Sorry, October. I felt like the banks were closed in the U.S. We couldn't access money until Monday. Or the banks are closed on Sunday in general. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a situation. So um, $20,000, and we negotiated, and my father was released on Sunday after we managed to get the money, but we weren't able to get the money till Monday. But they allowed my father to go free with the stipulation, if they didn't receive that 20 grand by that certain time, they were going to go back and kill everybody in my dad's area, in his the village that he lives in, which is
Oh, so your dad was in custody for 24 hours and he
yeah.
was released. Did he come back to the US immediately? He was released on Sunday. And how did you guys end up paying that ransom? How did that unfold?
So my dad did not come home, which was a huge problem for us, because we thought that, now that he was free, he was going to immediately come back. But that's actually when I realized what kind of person my father was, because after he experienced this horrific thing, he immediately said, I'm not leaving until I file a report and get the police active and get them to get these guys. Like, we
The
need to
the
arrest
Guatemalan police.
the Guatemalan police.
Okay.
So my dad's like, I'm not leaving until the police are after these guys. And I was like, whoa, like that was when I realized that my dad was brave, or foolish. I don't know.
All right.
But so my dad stayed another week, after he was
Wow.
released. He had to get some minor dental treatment because his teeth were knocked out. So he had to get some temporary fix for his teeth. He spent a couple days going through different police stations because the he was kidnapped in one state and then he was transported to a different state in Guatemala.
Hmm.
So he went to both regions and filed complaints, and then yeah, he came home. He came home, and it was obviously we never thought we see him again. I mean, that was my initial thought was we're never going to recuperate his body. When he
And
was taken.
and in the meantime, so two questions: how did the Guatemalan police react compared to the American police in here in Aurora? And did you guys end up paying that ransom when the banks opened on Monday?
We paid the ransom when the banks opened that Monday. First thing in the morning, we were at Wells Fargo on Sable in Mississippi, in Aurora, Colorado, and we paid. We had the money. We deposited. We told the bank teller what this was for because we were trying to figure out who this person was, and the kidnappers gave us a bank account number which we automatically assumed it belonged to somebody in Guatemala. That's only natural. The kidnapping happened there. So when we get to Wells Fargo and we give them this bank account number, they're like, this is not a Guatemalan bank account number. This belongs to somebody in the States. And we were like, unbelievable. Like, what is happening right now? And uh, this teller, broke protocols. She's like, you didn't see this? Don't say anything. She turned the computer screen over to us, and we saw the name of the person who received the money. And he lived in Lafayette, Colorado.
Did you recognize that name?
I didn't recognize him at the time, but as soon as we told my father, he knew exactly who he was and where he lived, and he had seen them before.
This is pretty, again, this is pretty interesting because, again, like this breaks all the protocol for like I'm Nigerian, right? And we have our own issues with kidnapping in northern Nigeria, eastern Nigeria. And again, like it's like, hey, people coming with schematics, you don't know who they are. When you're delivering the ransom, you're delivering cash. This is delivering to a bank account. Your dad knows who he did business with, knew he interacted with. It's just like a blatant kind of like disregard and all the information available for you guys to take to law enforcement. Did you guys do all that with the bank account number and follow up with law enforcement? And how did they react to all this information?
Well, we did go through that formal IC3 online form. So we included all of this information, the names, the bank account number, you name it, and we never heard anything back. No one at the FBI ever reached back. So we were waiting and waiting, and I was trying to follow up with them, and I got zero response back from the FBI. So it wasn't until 6 months later. 6 months later, an arrest happened. An arrest happened in Guatemala. So that was
Through the Guatemalan police or through the American police
through
or
the
the
through the
FBI?
Guatemalan police, and
Got
that
it.
was actually shocking because obviously, when you think about police south of the border, the first thought is corruption. They're not to be trusted. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was actually like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh my God, like the police in Guatemala are actually doing their jobs. Like they actually did a full-on investigation and they found one of the four men who kidnapped my dad and he got arrested and it was in the newspaper down there. And so it was like a huge deal. And even having that initial press was what got the FBI and Homeland Security interested in the case finally, because it
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, well, maybe they're not lying. So that actually started a new chapter in this whole investigation that lasted years. I mean, because even after that initial arrest, there was a pending trial that kept getting pushed back. So this was 2015, and there wasn't a trial until 2018.
Oh wow.
2019. Yeah, so justice is slow, so it kept getting pushed back every summer. They're like, oh, it'll be next summer. Oh, next summer, next summer. So,
Next
but
summer, I like the courts only operate during the summer, or
I don't know, but that's what they kept telling us. But during this several year period, there were still three men on the run in Guatemala, and then there was the two men
who was the
involved.
person arrested? Like how what was the person like an associate, or was the person like the main suspect?
He was the main suspect, and he was the man who received the damaged vehicle. Same guy that came and came the next morning wanting to grab a coffee
Right.
and chat.
And was he in custody these 3 years, or he got bailed out while you
He
guys
was
were
in,
waiting?
he was in custody the 3 years, and
Oh wow.
some weird things happened in between that. The access that Guatemalan prisoners have is different than the American prisoners because there was a period prior to the trial in 2018 that where this man in jail was calling my dad and threatening my family that was going to go and testify. So like he was calling on a regular basis from jail.
Okay.
Initially, it was in a threatening manner. And this was like maybe 3 or 4 calls where he was like, if you show up to testify, you will die. I'll kill your mother. I'll kill, whoever, right?
Right.
And then as maybe reality was starting to set for this guy that like maybe he wasn't going to leave jail, the phone calls actually turned into pleads of I've been here for these many years. My mother's sick. Please, like, will you like lie on the stand so I can be free and tend to my sick mother? So like
Wow.
the calls, turned into that manner, where like it was just like a poor man, down on his luck, pleading for help. And then the next wave of calls were his lawyers, and his lawyers were like, hey, this guy is offering to repay the ransom money to you guys
Wow. After 3 years.
after 3 years. He was just like, and the lawyers,
So did that
being
did that account in Wells Fargo belong to him or an associate of his?
an associate of his.
Got it.
So well, it's actually a brother of his, and the brother is the one who received the money and organized the kidnapping from Aurora, who is still free to this day and was never
Wow.
investigated.
It seems like a pretty open and shut case, if you ask me. So why did it take that long to get the trial going?
In Guatemala, I don't. Well, again, I'm not sure if it's a system where they want these individuals to serve time, because they did
Mm,
commit a serious crime. So you
right.
can't really rush to go to a trial, I think, So
Right.
I think they have to serve, their punishment, but yeah, no. So these lawyers started calling and saying, "Hey, you can get your money back, and we can make money in the process. Everybody's happy, So, and my dad was just like, "F you." I don't know if I can curse on this show, but he's
Yeah,
like,
sure.
yeah, fuck you. Like we're going all the way with this. Don't call me again. And my dad went to testify, soon after.
And during this time, this 3 years, how are things with the Leon family? How are things with your dad? Did he continue that business, continue to deliver cars even after this ordeal? What was your mom's reaction? What was the family going through during this period?
Yeah, it's a tough time that I don't really like to think about too much because it severed my family in a lot of ways, and it strained my parents' relationship. There was a point where they almost separated over this, just because my father's eh, how should I say, his not infatuation, but desire for justice.
Obsession, right?
Yeah, his obsession for justice started teetering into a dangerous levels, because since he knew who these individuals are, And when we started actually having serious conversations with the FBI and Homeland Security, they were basically telling us to get more evidence for them to do a proper investigation. So they were
Hmm.
asking my father to instigate phone calls with these guys. They were asking
Wow.
him to go and find their addresses and find their networks.
That
And so
doesn't sound like FBI protocol according to movies. Is it different in real life where they ask the victim to be involved in that way?
exactly. And the thing is that that is such a dangerous thing for them to have asked us to do, which my dad took serious, and I don't know, my mom says this a lot, like my dad watches too many movies, so I think he, saw this as his opportunity to have this like, you know, I don't know, adventure, and
Mm,
some kind of crime investigation. So he he basically was going out at night and spying on these guys and finding their
wow.
addresses. We found their Facebook profile photos, and I
Here in Colorado or in Guatemala?
in Colorado,
In
yeah,
Colorado, okay.
in Colorado.
Okay,
So
so that means the FBI was more concerned on the Colorado side as far as like the ransom payment and whatnot.
yeah, they almost didn't care about the Guatemala stuff. I think that was just out of their jurisdiction, and also they're like, well, they made an arrest, so they already did their job, So they,
Right,
but the fact that the money was tied to Denver, that's where maybe it piqued the interest of these agencies. But again, like it's unbelievable that they put us at risk like that, because if we would have gotten ourselves into a dangerous or fatal situation in Denver, it would have
right.
just been another more brown people dead, and they wouldn't have
Exactly.
cared. They wouldn't have gave a shit.
Yeah.
So
And
that
and
was
was your dad still doing this transmigrante business during this time?
he promised that he would only do this work and hand off the vehicles at the Texas-Mexico border. So
Ah,
financially, this like almost destroyed my dad's business overnight, because you make the maximum profits if you can, make the journey all the way.
all the way through.
So all the way through. So he was kind of one foot in, one foot out in the business, trying his best, but that's all he knew, was this business for 20 years. So him trying to reinvent himself, in his 60s, didn't seem like a viable option. So he tried his best, but not bringing in home the money that he used to. That also caused strain, and then again his obsession with trying to get justice and essentially putting our family at risk, right? Because if these guys live
Right.
in Denver, they know where we live, actually. So they've been to our house before, so that was always just a scary. It was a scary times, and it still is, because I think we'll never be able to really live comfortably without thinking that someone's watching us, or who's that weird car, strange car parked outside of the house. That was a
Mm,
big concern. Post kidnapping was just seeing just strange individuals or strange vehicles parked in the house, was just like, is that them?
right.
And that's gonna be kind of our paranoia for the rest of our lives, potentially.
Right. And from what I understand, your family kind of like amped up on security as well.
Yeah, my family was never we've never had weapons at home, but since then, yeah, my parents purchased weapons. We installed security cameras. My parents started, going out on weekends and learning how to shoot guns, and so then that was crazy. I'm like, my mom is shooting guns now. Like, what the hell is going on?
Right.
Like this is so strange. But yeah, me being, former military, I definitely, helped and trained them on certain situations, and I hope they never get to have to use any of that.
Right.
It's still a concern.
Did your dad have to go down for the court proceedings in Guatemala when that kicked off?
Yeah, so that was another strange. So we were in communication with the Guatemalan embassy in Denver, and they had offered to for us to do our testimonies in their conference room in the Guatemalan embassy. So
Mm-hmm.
that was great because we're like, amazing. We don't have to actually go down there. And 1 week before the trial was taking place, the judge, for whatever reason, in Guatemala said you have to do it in person. You can't do it at the Guatemalan embassy, and that was actually scary because we didn't mention this, but like the night of the kidnapping, when the kidnappers said not to contact the police, that was a huge decision for us to make, but we opted to do it. And when we called the Guatemalan authorities, within 5 minutes, the kidnappers called us back and said, "We know you called the cops. Do it again, and we'll kill your dad."
Ah, oh wow.
So
So they had access. Well, I guess you mentioned corruption in South American law enforcement, so they probably had people
yeah,
on the inside.
so then when when lawyers were calling us trying to repay our ransom money, and then when the judge canceled this Guatemalan embassy video conference, we were like, this has to be all a part of the same
Right,
corruption. Like they this is a setup. They want us to go down there so we can, get killed or whatever, So my mom, our family decided that my mom could not go. Like there's no way she can go. She didn't end up going. And later, when the case was dropped, the lawyers blamed my mother for this guy being released because she was unable to go. But that
Who's
was,
lawyer? Like your lawyers blamed your mother?
yeah, like the DA, the district attorney, and like the
Ah,
police.
on the
Yeah.
American side. Right, right.
No, 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 Guatemalan side,
Oh,
Guatemalan.
got it.
The Americans were not involved in the trial at all. This was
Got it.
strictly a Guatemalan affair. Um,
Well, how was your mom? Like your dad was the victim, right? Oh, I guess because she was the one they contacted and she was some type of a witness to the whole thing and she didn't
well, her,
but
her bank account was used for
was
the
used.
ransom.
Ah, I
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why.
So that means her
So
part of the story wasn't admissible in court or wasn't used during the case, I guess.
yeah, so since she couldn't show in person, they just basically dismissed her, and she was like one of the key witnesses. So since she didn't testify, that hurt the case, according to the police on our side. But one step further, and the key eyewitness who helped rescue my father when he was released in the middle of nowhere. He went to pick him up and took him to the first police stations to file those initial reports. He denied that the kidnapping happened the day of the trial, and he
Mm,
was intimidated the weeks prior. Someone broke into his apartment, destroyed the place, sent him a strong message, basically, if you testify, we'll kill you.
right,
And when he testified, he basically said, I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything. And when that happened, plus my mom not being able to go,
right.
the case was dropped and the kidnapper was released.
Wow. When did this happen? When was the case dropped?
This was like the early 2019.
So 2014 to 2019. So 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
At which point the suspect was in custody and your family had to go through all this in 5 years back and forth to Guatemala. And the case was eventually dropped. Like I'm sure you guys must have expended a lot of resources. You had paid the ransom, your the traveling cost, your father's business wasn't picking up. How did that news of the case being dropped? How did your dad and your family take that news?
It was crushing, man. That was the first time that I saw my dad, almost cry. He might have cried in private, but it was a very difficult moment. And seeing my dad in that state, and me too. I mean, I was devastated just because, like you said, all the traveling, all the expenses, just being too close to the story, and for like justice not to be served when it's such a clear cut case.
Mm-hmm.
and being disrespected by U.S. law enforcement, where they didn't take it serious ever.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, even when they did entertain our pleads after that arrest, it seemed like it was hopeful, but it never really was. I don't think it was ever close. And every time we asked for updates, they're like, we cannot confirm nor deny that there's an open investigation. And
Mm.
so, in my eyes, they never did anything, or even attempted to. And so that's still pretty disgraceful to this
They
day.
couldn't confirm if there was an open investigation to the people who instigated the investigation. That's weird. To
Yeah.
to the victims of the crime. That's interesting. I mean, it's not like a third party, but
No, exactly. And oh, we didn't mention this, before we get too far. Like there's the article that came out in 5280 magazine that
mm,
details all of this from every point of view, from the authorities to Guatemalan individuals who are involved in the situation.
yeah, and we'll have a link to that article and your website. And this is another angle, right? Like that article came about because you just so happen to be a documentary filmmaker. Like after the military, you went to film school, you picked up a camera, you did your first kind of like short or I don't know what they call in the for your first media production, I guess I'll call it. And you started to get interested in the case because it happened to your family, and you started documenting it. And you said you'd been following your dad around for the past 7 years, kind of like documenting it. Like, why did you decide to start telling this story about your family's, I guess, very sensitive issues, and what makes you want to make this public?
Well, I started for that reason that it was the only way that I could fight back. It was
Mm,
like my manner was to let me document these injustices because they're going to come in play in the future, and then also on top of that, I was doing different types of workshops in Denver to help veterans get through PTSD. And there was a wave during that period of like 2013 to 2015 where like art therapy started becoming a thing, even within the VA system, actually.
mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of filmmaking workshops or just any kind of different art stuff for veterans. And there was a lot of just hopeful signs that it was actually helping people process their trauma in a different way. So I actually tried to apply that for my father because I knew that he would never go see a psychiatrist or any kind of
Mm,
therapist, just coming from a different generation.
right.
So I was like, you know what? It's helped people that I've worked with in the past. It's helped me. Well, let me put a camera in front of my dad and maybe give him a platform to at least speak about these things and vent and kind of think of process this traumatic event, between he and I, on camera. So I did it to help him, but I didn't know it was gonna that I'd be documenting this long. I didn't know that I would end up with, 500-600 hours of footage that I've accumulated from 2015 to 2021.
Mm,
I've been filming that entire period and screaming from the mountaintops for help to local law enforcement or journalists or uh, production companies for any kind of assistance to try to tell this story and do this injustice right. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and that article in 5280 magazine just happened this January. It was an interesting process. They interviewed me and my family over the course of 4 or 5 months. There were several fact checkers involved. So it's a very thorough piece, and we're proud of how it turned out. But like you said, it's also scary because our story is finally public, and this magazine is available at every major grocery store in Denver, Colorado, and these are the same grocery stores that these individuals go to. So
Mm,
it's not, it wouldn't be a shocker if they came across this, and how will they take this, you know?
yeah,
So
especially now that the case has been dropped and they're free, right?
exactly. So will they see this as like an attack on them? No one's named, you know. Some
Hmm.
the names have been changed, you know, to protect everyone, I guess, across the board. But yeah, that's a big concern, you know. I don't know if the more people that see it can provide security, I believe, you know,
Hmm.
just because at least there's awareness, but
Right.
also the more people that see it, the word can spread back to these individuals, you know.
Definitely. And beyond the local magazine, like you said, you've garnered like 600 hours of footage. You live in LA now and you're looking to make a documentary out of it. So, you're even looking to push the story bigger. Like, what are your plans for all of that footage, and what do you want to get as an output out of all this material you have?
Yeah, a feature documentary, a 90-minute film has always been the goal. A series is also possible. And since the article has come out, it's actually been pretty interesting because I have been contacted by movie companies interested in maybe taking this to the next level. It's all early talks, and nothing's promised. And I have had these conversations in the past that went nowhere.
Mm,
But in my mind, I think it's still it's utmost priority for me personally to finish this because it has taken up so much of my time that it I feel like I'm shackled to this thing. I feel like I'm a slave to this uh project. And again, I've been on it for way longer than I ever expected. And I feel like I'll never be able to get my mental freedom back until I actually finish this. So that's where I'm at now. I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but I really need to finish this because it's trained me in more ways than you can imagine.
yeah, totally understand your perspective. Kind of like also maybe providing some type of closure to your family as well, and maybe also getting some help, through this, spreading the word. How can people who are listening to this, and I know you said you've always had people reach out to you, but say someone is listening to this and want to be involved in the project in some way, or just want to support your family, financially, or maybe they're part of some organization that can help you out in one way or the other. How can they support you? What are the ways in which you are soliciting for support, and how can they reach out to you for that type of support?
Well, I'm about to launch a crowdfunding campaign to at least get the seed money to start editing this project, and all that information can be found on storiesbyelvis.com. And yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle just to even get this money. It's tough times right now. Everybody's clutching to every cent they're having, and this post-pandemic world that we're in now, it's not the same, and it's a terrible time to try to fundraise. But I feel like that's basically my primary goal right now is to try to finish telling the story, and but yeah, if anyone out there, any organizations or anyone wants to support in any way on the film production side, video editing side, I would love to even just chat with you. And yeah, once again, storiesbyelvis.com.
Definitely, and we'll have the link to that in the show notes as well. You guys can go there and get a glimpse of some of the footage, and more details about Elvis's and the Leon's family story. What about the name "We Are Lions"? Like, what does that represent? Why did you choose that name? And is that the final name that you want for this story
Yeah,
documentary?
for now, I want to go for the Spanish version. Somos leones. We are lions. And well, my family's last name is Leon, which translation is lion. And the thought process behind it is obviously these family being brave enough, like a lion, to go into the lion's den, back to the scene of the crime, which we didn't even speak about actually.
Hmm.
Me and my father, after the trial drops, the case is dropped. Me and my father still go back 1 year later
Wow.
to get closure. So we go back, and the other thing too, with having these dangerous individuals around, I'm grouping them into Somos Leones. Like they're also, it's just brave, not brave, but like dangerous,
Right.
dangerous actors that are there. So whatever the lion means to the definition of being a lion, that's kind of what like this title represents, is just everyone included, from the good people to the evil people.
Got it. Definitely understand that. And man, this is, a whole lot. Not a lot of people get to go through so much turmoil, and your family has endured a lot, and hopefully, um, the family can find closure in some way. Definitely with our little platform, we'll amplify the story as much as we can. Also putting you in touch with a few other podcasters to see how we can get this out there. But I'm sorry for what you went through, and hopefully we can get this closure, final closure. What is one thing, I don't know, from your ordeal, because there's so many parts to the story, right? The PTSD, pulling the veil back and getting to see the government for what it is, feeling that sense of betrayal, the immigrant story, the family. What are one or two lessons you think you can share from any one of those angles to listeners right now? And that can tie to maybe how to handle grief, how to deal with the government, how to be secure from any angle from the
Mm.
story. What are one or two lessons you feel you can share?
The one thing that immediately popped up is actually coming from my father. The one thing that my father wants to, the message he wants to share is that he just believes that we all need to step up and speak out against injustice, because these actors who have taken over our communities and countries, depending on where you're from, they have really instilled fear in our
Mm,
community, where people can't even speak back, because of retribution. And that's what my father was saying. Like he's willing to die for justice,
wow.
and that was his main message, is that we need to speak up, when we're seeing our communities falling apart by these individuals that aren't taking care of us or don't have the best interests
Right.
of us, So that's I would say that's the main message for now.
Got it. And thank you so much, Elvis, for sharing the story. I know it mustn't be easy for you because you're reliving some of these experiences and sharing that story. We appreciate you. And again, like I said, our little platform, amplifying the story as much as we can. And you guys check out Elvis's website, it's storiesbyelvis.com. We'll have the link in the show notes as well, so you can continue to follow this story. And when Elvis has that fundraiser up, we'll also amplify that through the Culture Class podcast platforms on social media as well. Elvis, thank you so much. Your dad has the heart of a lion, I guess the last name Leon, and you as well for how far you've taken this. I appreciate you coming on the podcast to tell your story.
Thank you so much, Nusa, and I'll see you in Denver soon.
Definitely. And for our listeners, this is Culture Class Podcast. You can follow us as cultureclasspodcast.com. We'll have Elvis's profile up on the website. Follow us on social media and send us an email at cultureclasspodcast@gmail.com if you want to be connected to Elvis, or if you want to comment on the story, let us know. Till next episode, thank you so much for listening, and be well.